I'm Aaron France, and today I want to talk about Lineage, a solo role playing game where you take on the role of a royal historian, charting the rise and fall of a line of monarchs. Let's start taking a look at how to play. The first thing you need is the name of your very first monarch, the progenitor of all monarchs to come in this line. What they're called is entirely up to you. To help flesh out who they are, though, we also need to match that with a sobriquet, a nickname that helps describe the monarch's rule, like the pious or the young. Now, Lineage provides plenty of these, but to select one, you roll two standard six-sided dice. To start, I'll name our first monarch Edith Dordrum. And as I roll our two dice, we get the results 6 and 1. If I then look up the result 6-1, I can see that it gives us the sobriquet, the Cruel. As the royal historian, I then write these down in an ongoing record of our line of monarchs. Next up is determining who the monarch's spouse is. To do that, first you need to give them a name, then rolling 2d6, which is simply shorthand for two six-sided dice, look up the result in Lineage's spouse table. For our example, I'll give the name Gunhild to the spouse. And rolling 2d6 tells us that Gunhild was a close relative known for intrigue. As a royal historian, I again write these down in our ongoing record. Next, it's time to generate heirs. You roll 2d6 again, but rather than looking up the result in the prompt, this time the result of the 2d6 tells you how many children the monarch had. You then roll 1d6 to see how many died before adulthood. You can then use dice to determine, or you can simply choose the gender of the surviving children. What's more important, however, is that you record the name of the monarch, the name of the spouse, and the names of the children and their genders in a family tree. Now you have your ruler, their spouse, and their children, you can stop recording facts and start to record history. This is the point in the game where your imagination begins to really take root. You roll a d6 to see how many defining events occurred during the monarch's lifetime. For each event, you then generate a prompt. Taking into account everything you know about them, you imagine how they might react. So when I'm thinking about how Edith might respond, I'm imagining she's a malevolent, cruel queen whose response is shaped by this isolated existence she's lived, where her only confidant, her spouse, who's a relative, is scheming and plotting either in league with her or behind her back. Clearly, this is an environment where poor and rash decisions will be made. It kind of feels a little bit House of Gucci. To find out the first event that will shape your monarch's reign, the event that you'll respond to, you roll 2d6 to select a prompt. For either rule, the prompt we're given is that philosophers theorize that giving greater power to nobles may increase productivity. With that seed of a situation, it's time to imagine how she might respond. A suggestion to reduce her power, to cede powers to nobles, I don't think she's likely to respond well. I think she's much more likely, given her moniker as the Cruel, to kill the philosophers for suggesting such an idea. Maybe this is where she earns her moniker as the Cruel. Maybe this is a formative moment for her. Whatever the prompt is and however your monarch reacts, you, as the royal historian, record the name of the monarch, the igniting event or inspiring event, and the reaction the monarch had in the official history book. You then continue to generate events until you've recorded the response for the total number of defining events you rolled for this monarch. Once you've recorded each defining event, you then bid farewell to your monarch by determining the cause of their death. In their example, Edith dies at the hands of an assassin. I think perhaps Edith's cruelty finally pushed someone in her own family, maybe her nephew, to usurp her. This is, of course, noted in the official history that you're keeping. Now the monarch is dead, it's time to select a successor, using whichever law of succession you see fit. In our case, since our dead monarch has children, it'll pass to one of them. And in the Northern Kingdom, where Edith rules, the eldest surviving son is crowned. Now you have your next ruler, you repeat the entire process from front to back. You generate a spouse for them, you determine the number of heirs they have and their names, you update the family tree, you record their response to the events of their time, and then coming full circle again, determine their cause of death and name their successor. And you do this again and again and again until the family itself is no more. The lineage has come to an end. How might a lineage end, you ask? Well, every so often you may randomly select a prompt which is marked as a U+1 or a D+1 or a W+1. These prompts influence the fate of the entire family line. Each lineage starts with 3 scores set at 0: their dishonorable score, their unstable score, and their weak score. Whenever you select one of these prompts that has a +1 after it, you increase the relevant score by that number. And if any score ever reaches 8 or more, then for each new monarch, you roll on the corresponding table. These tables are sources of collapse and quicken the end of the lineage. That's it. That's all you really need to know to play Lineage. Now you know how to play it, let's talk about what makes it shine. Lineage, above all else, is an incredibly charming solo RPG. It's inviting, it doesn't take much to get started with, and it lends itself quite well to being picked up, put down, resumed, played with for a bit, and shelved for 6 months, and then picked up again. Each cycle of a generation you see is relatively quick, and finishing a generation is a good point to stop. It doesn't take long for you to go from a monarch being chosen to rule to being succeeded. And whenever you do that process, you go from the front of the book right through to the back. So by the time it's time to get to the next monarch, you have to start from the beginning again anyway, and that's a great time to put it down. I think one of the most genius parts of the game is the role of the royal historian that you play as. Rather than playing as a monarch that's part of the action, you instead play the role of an observer and a recorder. You're kept at arm's length from what's going on. And with that status or position comes the ability to completely freely engage with the prompts as fiction, rather than as an embodied experience. You take on the role of a director, not an actor, and so you're actually off the hook for the fate of the realm. It doesn't matter if the queen decides to kill the envoy from a neighboring kingdom, inciting a war, because you're not worrying about the direct consequences. You're treating this as an exercise of storytelling. And the role you play as a royal historian also gives you an interesting amount of freedom as to how to play the game. In my first game, I took sparse notes, recording only facts, names, numbers, and for each of these defining moments for a monarch, I wrote a single short sentence summarizing their response. I was more interested in the what than the how. But in my most recent game, I took the opposite approach. I wrote much longer, more detailed, flavorful entries, noting down small details or impressions that I would have had if I was a royal historian engaging in the moment. And there's no right or wrong here. That's the beauty of it. Lineage is one of these RPGs that fits into this neat growing class where the artifact you're left with is as much a part of the joy of the RPG as the experience of playing it. Lineage is therefore perfect for world building. You can take the legacies built here and transfer them into your medieval fantasy RPG to create a storied history that's full of depth and nuance that others can then enjoy in a different setting. It's worth saying that despite its flexibility, Lineage is a singular concept. If you like the idea of weaving extensive medieval histories, then you'll know immediately that this is a game for you. And in that instance, I would wholly recommend it. What Lineage isn't is a game that's necessarily for everyone. If you want to be the character, or if the thought of creating an imagined history doesn't appeal to you, then you can safely give this game a miss. This is not a game where you play an individual role, and certainly not a game where you interact a lot with others. This is a game of quiet kingdom building. For the folks who are interested in that, though, Lineage is a fantastic game and a great tool in your toolkit. If you've made it this far and you enjoyed watching it, then that's it. Please go ahead and press all the buttons below, and I have exactly one other video you can check out. So go do that. I'll put it up here. And thanks for watching.